All right, so have you ever found yourself tapping your foot to some good old rock and roll and wondering, how did this music become like a worldwide thing?
Yeah, it's really something, isn't it? How rock and roll went from, you know, just a bunch of chords to this global phenomenon.
Exactly. And today we're going to dive deep into how it all began.
Yeah, we're going to go way back to the 1950s in America and see how rock and roll was born.
And we've got this really cool document about the history of music that we're going to use as our guide for this deep dive.
Yeah, this document is actually like a whole music curriculum, but we're going to focus on year 4 where it talks about rock and roll.
Oh, get ready to maybe remember some stuff you learned way back when, but with a fresh perspective.
And we're going to uncover some really interesting stuff like the surprising connection between rock and roll and the sea.
Yeah, who knew, right? Plus, we'll break down the special mix of musical ingredients that made rock and roll so unique.
So let's get this deep dive started.
All right, so picture this. America, right after World War II.
Everyone's feeling this huge sense of relief. The war is over.
And there's this new feeling of hope in the air, right?
Exactly. And people are just craving something new and exciting, something to celebrate with.
Something with energy, right?
Totally. And that's where rock and roll comes in.
It was like the perfect soundtrack for this new era, a way to just let loose and have fun.
It's like the whole country was ready to just cut loose, and rock and roll gave them the perfect way to do it.
But here's something you might not know. The name rock and roll actually has a pretty surprising origin.
Oh, yeah. It's not what you'd expect. It actually comes from sailor slang.
Sailors. What do they have to do with rock and roll?
Well, sailors use the term rocking and rolling to describe the motion of a ship on the waves. You know how it goes up and down and side to side?
I see. And so that kind of wild, unpredictable movement is like what rock and roll is all about.
Exactly. It's that feeling of untamed energy and excitement that both the ship and the music share.
And when you think about it, a lot of those classic rock and roll dance moves, like the swinging and swaying,
Yeah.
they kind of mimic that rocking and rolling motion of a ship.
It's like they were channeling the sea without even realizing it.
So we've got this awesome energy, this cool name, but what about the music itself? Like, what made rock and roll sound so different, so new?
Well, rock and roll was like this amazing melting pot of different musical styles. It took bits and pieces from jazz, gospel, and especially blues.
I love blues music. It's got so much soul.
Oh, yeah, me too. And rock and roll took that soulful blues feeling and amped it up.
So they borrowed from the blues, but how did they make it rock and roll?
Well, they did a few things. First, they took that classic 12-bar blues structure, that familiar pattern of chords.
Yeah, kind of like a musical blueprint, right?
Right, and they injected it with energy by making the tempo faster and using more complex chord changes they borrowed from jazz.
So it's like they took this familiar blues bass and added this electrifying jazz twist to it.
Exactly. They took something old and familiar and made it fresh and exciting and new.
It was like a musical evolution.
Absolutely. But it wasn't just about combining genres. Rock and roll also had a distinct sound and feel.
So, what made it sound so different from anything else at the time?
Well, think about the sound itself. It was fast, it was loud, it was raw.
Yeah, lots of energy and those powerful vocals, sometimes with screaming and shouting.
It was a complete shift from the smoother, more polished music that was popular before.
It was like rock and roll saying, hey, we're here, we're loud, and we're not holding anything back.
Exactly. And that raw energy really resonated with people, especially the younger generation.
And, when you think about it, that rebellious spirit of rock and roll paved the way for so much of the music we listen to today.
Absolutely. Think about all the bands you love, the energy they bring to their performances. It all goes back to those early rock and roll pioneers.
It really changed the musical landscape forever.
They did. And one of the key ingredients in that signature rock and roll sound was the walking bass line.
Walking bass line. I've heard that term before, but what does it actually mean?
So imagine the bass notes moving steadily, step by step, like they're walking.
Okay, I can kind of hear it in my head.
It's that driving rhythmic pulse that underpins so many rock and roll classics. It keeps the music moving forward.
It's like the heartbeat of the song.
Exactly. And speaking of rhythm, let's talk about some other musical terms that are important in rock and roll.
Yeah, because if you really want to understand rock and roll, it helps to know the lingo right.
Absolutely. So let's start with bass line, which we just talked about. It's that low-end groove that anchors the song.
Then there's notation, which is basically the written language of music, like how those notes are put on paper.
And of course, there's tempo, which refers to the speed of the music, like how fast or slow it is.
And then there's dynamics, which
Yes.
is all about volume, how loud or soft the music is.
And then we have in time, which means playing together in sync with the beat.
And finally, in tune, which means hitting the right notes, making sure everything sounds harmonious.
So now you've got a little musical vocabulary to help you appreciate rock and roll even more.
You'll be able to impress your friends with your music knowledge.
Exactly. But let's not forget about another crucial element of rock and roll. The dancing.
Oh yeah, rock and roll is all about moving and grooving.
Think about all those iconic dances like the hand jive with those energetic hand movements.
For just the pure joy of letting loose on the dance floor when that rock and roll music hits you.
It was a whole new way of moving to the music, a way to express yourself and just have fun.
It was all about freedom and letting go.
Exactly. And speaking of expression, let's talk about the instruments that gave rock and roll its signature sound.
So what were the key players in the rock and roll band?
Well, you've got the drums providing that driving beat.
Yeah, the heartbeat of the song, right?
Exactly. And then you have the double bass adding that deep resonance.
Yeah, kind of like the soul of the music, right?
I like that. And then, of course, you can't forget the electric guitar and electric bass.
Those are the instruments that really give rock and roll its edge, right?
Absolutely. They bring that electrifying energy and those iconic riffs that we all know and love.
It's like each instrument has its own unique voice. And when they all come together, it creates that irresistible rock and roll energy.
It's a magical combination.
So we've seen how rock and roll emerged from this amazing mix of musical styles and how it perfectly captured the energy and optimism of post-war America.
It was more than just a genre of music. It was a cultural movement, a reflection of the times.
It was about breaking free, expressing yourself, and having a good time.
Exactly. And its influence is still felt today in so many ways.
But it makes you wonder, how has rock and roll continued to evolve over the years? How is it still shaping the music we hear today?
That's a great question to ponder, and I think the answer lies in exploring the music itself.
So the next time you listen to your favorite rock and roll song, really listen closely.
See if you can hear those bluesy roots, that walking bass line, those powerful vocals. Maybe you'll discover a whole new appreciation for the music you love.
And you might even start to hear the echoes of rock and roll in all sorts of music today.
It's a journey of discovery, and we encourage you to keep exploring the amazing world of rock and roll.
And with that, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the origins of rock and roll.
Thanks for joining us on this musical adventure.
We hope you learned something new and maybe even got inspired to put on some rock and roll and just let loose.
Until next time, keep rocking.
Keep rocking.